Alistair Blackwood was one of the richest men in the world, a titan of industry whose name could move markets and command the attention of world leaders. Yet, in the sprawling, silent expanse of his marble-floored mansion, all his power evaporated, leaving him a hollowed-out man haunted by a silence he could not break. No amount of money could fix his son. After firing 7 maids in as many months, each one a highly qualified professional who retreated in defeat, his desperation had curdled into a brittle, cold resignation. His 5-year-old son, Leo, lived in a world no one could enter, a fortress of silence diagnosed as profound, nonverbal autism. He didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, and recoiled from human touch as if it were fire. Then, a woman named Amelia Hale arrived for an interview. She was nothing like the others. There was a quiet stillness about her, a painful past etched in the gentle lines around her eyes, and she didn't carry a portfolio of glowing recommendations. She carried only a profound, aching empathy that seemed to absorb the oppressive grief in the room. Alistair hired her against his better judgment, a final futile gesture before surrendering completely. He expected her to last a week. But one afternoon a shocking event broke him completely, shattering the cold facade he had built around his heart and changing everything he thought he knew about his son. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The Blackwood mansion was less a home and more a museum of a life that had once been. Sunlight, meticulously filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminated dust-free surfaces and priceless art, but it carried no warmth. It was a sterile, echoing mausoleum, and Alistair Blackwood was its chief curator. His wife, Eleanor, had been the home's vibrant heart, and her sudden death 2 years prior had ripped the life from the building and from its 2 remaining occupants. Alistair had thrown himself into his work, building an empire upon the bedrock of his grief. It was easier to command a boardroom than to sit in the suffocating silence of his son's room. Leo, his beautiful, broken boy, was the living embodiment of his failure. Before Eleanor's death, there had been laughter. Now, there was only the cold clinical routine managed by a rotating staff who spoke in hushed tones and walked on soft-soled shoes. The 7th maid, a stern woman with impeccable credentials in special needs care, had left just yesterday. "The boy is unreachable, Mr. Blackwood," she had stated, her voice devoid of compassion. "You are maintaining a fantasy. He requires institutionalization." The words had struck Alistair with the force of a physical blow, and he had fired her on the spot, his voice a low, dangerous tremor. But her words echoed in the silence, a poisonous seed of doubt. Was he being selfish? Was he prolonging Leo's suffering by keeping him here? The thought was a constant torment, another ghost to add to the mansion's collection. That was the state of his world when Amelia Hale walked through the massive oak doors. She was unassuming, dressed in simple, neat clothing that stood in stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Her application was thin. Her last job was at a small community library, and before that, a long gap she explained away with a quiet, "I was taking care of a family matter." He should have dismissed her immediately. He had specified a candidate with a background in pediatric nursing or developmental psychology. But there was something in her gaze. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a quiet recognition of pain that he hadn't seen in anyone else's eyes. The other candidates had looked at him with a mixture of awe and professional detachment. Amelia looked at him and saw a grieving father. "The agency said the position is challenging," she said, her voice soft but clear, not intimidated by the vaulted ceilings or the imposing figure before her. "They are correct," Alistair replied, his tone clipped and dismissive. He led her through the house, a perfunctory tour meant to discourage her. He pointed out the security cameras, the strict schedules, the dietary restrictions, the long list of protocols for interacting, or rather, not interacting with Leo. There is to be no physical contact unless absolutely necessary for his safety. No loud noises, no sudden movements. He does not respond to verbal communication. Your duties are primarily to maintain his rooms and prepare his meals to the exact specifications provided by his physician, Dr. Finch. You are not his therapist. You are not his playmate. You are staff. Is that understood? Each word was a brick in the wall he maintained between himself and the world, between himself and his own hope. Amelia simply nodded, her eyes taking in everything, not the art, not the architecture, but the palpable sadness that clung to the air like a shroud. They reached the doorway of Leo's room. The boy was sitting on the floor, surrounded by pristine educational toys that he never touched. His focus was entirely on a small worn wooden horse, its paint chipped from years of being clutched in a small hand. He rocked back and forth, a steady rhythmic motion that was his only constant form of expression. His hair was the same shade of gold as his mother's. The sight was a daily dagger to Alistair's heart. "This is Leo," Alistair said, his voice losing some of its harshness. Amelia didn't speak. She just watched. Her presence was so unobtrusive that for a moment Alistair felt she had simply blended into the background. She stood perfectly still a few feet behind Alistair in the doorway. Most people, when faced with Leo, filled the space with noise, cooing, professional jargon, or awkward, forced pleasantries. Amelia offered only silence, and then it happened. It was so small, so infinitesimally slight, that Alistair almost missed it. Leo, who was positioned facing away from them, rocked back. His small body, for a single fleeting second, listed almost imperceptibly in their direction. His rocking had always been a self-contained, defensive motion. But this was different. It wasn't a recoil, it was a lean. An unconscious magnetic pull toward the stillness that Amelia had brought into the hallway. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. A coincidence. A trick of the light. His file, a document thicker than a novel and filled with reports from the nation's top specialists, was unequivocal. Leo had a severe sensory processing disorder. He could not tolerate proximity. He did not register the presence of others in a relational way, but Alistair had seen it, a fractional shift in his son's carefully constructed orbit. He looked at Amelia. She was still watching Leo, her expression unreadable but for a flicker of intense, focused concentration. She gave no sign that she had noticed the tiny anomaly. "The pay is substantial," Alistair said abruptly, his voice rougher than he intended. "The contract includes a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will live on site. You will begin tomorrow." He didn't know why he said it. Every logical part of his brain screamed against it. She was unqualified, a mystery. But the image of that tiny, almost invisible lean had cracked something open inside him. It was the first unexpected thing that had happened in this house in 2 years. And for the first time in a very long time, Alistair Blackwood made a decision not with his head, but with a desperate, buried shard of a father's intuition. He hired her, not knowing that he hadn't just hired a maid. He had just let in the only person on earth who could solve the mystery of his son. Amelia's first few days were a study in quiet observation. She moved through the cavernous house with a ghost's tread. Her presence felt only in the results of her work. Perfectly polished surfaces, immaculately laundered clothes, and the faint, clean scent of lemon and lavender that began to replace the stale, sterile air of the mansion. She adhered to Alistair's rules with meticulous precision. She never spoke to Leo, never tried to initiate contact. Her primary interaction with the boy was the delivery of his meal trays, which she would place just inside his bedroom door before retreating silently. But her mind was a whirlwind of activity. Every moment was an act of gathering information. She wasn't just cleaning Leo's room, she was studying it. She noted how the same untouched toys were always arranged in the same configuration, not by the boy, but by the previous staff. A sterile tableau of what a child's room should look like. The only object that ever moved was the little wooden horse, which was always in Leo's hand or resting beside him as he slept. It was his anchor, his totem. She paid close attention to the schedule dictated by Dr. Finch. At 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m., a nurse, a stern and efficient woman named Mrs. Gable would arrive to administer Leo's medication. It was a complex cocktail of liquids described in the file as an experimental regimen to regulate neurological overstimulation. Amelia observed that within an hour of each dose, Leo's rhythmic rocking would become more pronounced, his gaze more distant, his entire being seeming to retreat even further into his impenetrable shell. Conversely, in the early mornings before the 8 a.m. dose, she noticed a subtle difference. There was a fraction less tension in his small shoulders, a stillness that was less rigid and more peaceful. It was a fleeting window, but it was there. Her heart, which held its own deep, cavernous grief, recognized the pattern not with clinical analysis, but with a painful, maternal instinct. She began her own series of gentle, silent experiments. One morning, while cleaning the expansive sunroom that overlooked the neglected gardens, she found a single perfectly smooth gray stone. It was cool to the touch, its surface worn into a pleasing oval by time and weather. That afternoon, when she delivered Leo's lunch tray, she placed the stone on the floor a few feet away from where he was sitting, well outside his personal space. She said nothing, did nothing to draw his attention to it. She simply left it and walked away. For 2 days, the stone remained untouched. On the 3rd day, it was gone. Amelia's heart beat a little faster when she saw the empty spot on the carpet. Later, she saw it. While Leo was rocking, his free hand, the one not clutching the wooden horse, was curled around the smooth gray stone. He wasn't playing with it. He was just holding it, absorbing its texture and temperature. He had chosen it. He had taken something new into his world. The next experiment involved sound. The silence in the mansion was absolute, oppressive. Amelia, who had once sung lullabies to her own lost child, found the quiet unbearable. One afternoon, while preparing Leo's meal in the vast, stainless steel kitchen, she began to hum. It was a simple, nameless melody, a tune that had lived in her heart since her own childhood. It was soft, barely audible, more for her own comfort than for anyone else. She hummed the same tune every day, at the same time. She expected no reaction. It was a small act of defiance against the crushing silence. She started noticing things Alistair, in his grief-stricken distraction, had long since overlooked. She saw the way Leo's eyes, which were supposed to be vacant, would briefly track a bird flying past the window. She saw the minute tensing of his jaw when his father's heavy, stressed footsteps echoed down the hall. These were not the reactions of a boy entirely disconnected from the world. They were the reactions of a prisoner, listening intently from behind a thick wall. Her suspicion began to coalesce around the medication. The timing was too perfect, the effect too pronounced. The boy she saw in the early morning hours was not the same boy who existed for the rest of the day. The drugs were not regulating him, they were erasing him. Alistair Blackwood watched her on the security monitors that fed into a large screen in his home office. He had told himself it was for security, to ensure she followed the rules. But it was more than that. He found himself mesmerized by her quiet methodology. He saw her place the stone. He saw it disappear. He saw it later in Leo's hand. He felt a flicker of something he couldn't name, annoyance at her defiance of protocol, but also a sliver of grudging respect. She wasn't trying to fix Leo. She was simply waiting, offering small, silent invitations and allowing him to choose whether or not to accept. He saw her tidying Leo's room. Unlike the others who would work around the boy as if he were a piece of furniture, Amelia seemed to create a silent dialogue with him through her movements. She would move a toy, then pause, watching him from the corner of her eye. Her actions were slow, deliberate, and respectful of his space. She was treating his room not as a sterile environment to be maintained, but as a nest to be cared for. One evening, Alistair was reviewing quarterly reports, the numbers blurring before his eyes. When he heard it, faintly through the office soundproofing, he heard the soft, melodic humming coming from the kitchen. It was a sound so alien in this house of silence that he froze. It was gentle, sad, and strangely beautiful. He switched the monitor to the kitchen camera. Amelia was there, kneading dough, her back to the camera, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm of her humming. It was a simple, domestic act, yet it felt like a profound intrusion. He was about to march down there and remind her of the "no loud noises" rule, but he stopped himself. The sound wasn't loud. It was life, a small spark of it in the overwhelming darkness. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, the house felt fractionally less like a tomb. He didn't understand what this woman was doing, but he couldn't deny the evidence he'd seen with his own eyes. The stone. The tracking of the bird. He was a man who dealt in data and evidence, and the data was beginning to contradict the official diagnosis. A fragile, terrifying hope began to wage a war against his long-held resignation. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a thunderclap, but a whisper. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the promise of rain. Amelia was in the kitchen, a space she had slowly been transforming from a cold, industrial chamber into something resembling the heart of a home. The scent of baking bread, a warm, yeasty aroma, now hung in the air, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell that had once prevailed. She was humming her simple, nameless melody as she wiped down the marble countertops. It had become a habit, a quiet ritual that soothed the frayed edges of her own sorrow. Suddenly she felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, the subtle feeling of being watched. She turned slowly. Standing in the grand archway that connected the kitchen to the main hall was Leo. Her breath caught in her chest, a sharp, painful intake of air. In the 2 months she had been there, he had never once voluntarily left his designated wing of the house. The journey from his bedroom to the kitchen was a vast, uncharted territory for him. Yet here he was. He wasn't rocking. He was standing perfectly still, his small body framed by the imposing doorway, his wide blue eyes, Eleanor's eyes, were fixed on her. Not through her, not past her, but on her. It was the first real eye contact she had ever shared with him. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the space between them. The hum died in her throat. She didn't move, didn't breathe. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that this was a pivotal moment, as delicate as a spider's web. Any sudden movement, any sound, could shatter it completely. Leo's gaze was intense, searching. He was drawn not just by the sound, but by the feeling behind it, the warmth, the life, the gentle sorrow that infused her simple tune. His world was one of harsh silence and scheduled intrusions. This was something else entirely, something soft and inviting. He took a hesitant step forward, his bare feet silent on the cold marble. Then another. Each step was a monumental effort, a journey across a terrifying chasm. In one hand he clutched his worn wooden horse. In the other, the smooth gray stone she had left for him. He stopped about 10 feet away from her, his gaze never leaving her face. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he extended the hand, holding the horse. It was not a grand gesture. It was a small, trembling offering. The wooden horse was his shield, his comfort, the one constant in his chaotic, silent world. And he was offering it to her. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, hot and immediate, but she willed them not to fall. She could not frighten him. She sank to her knees slowly, gracefully, making herself smaller, less intimidating. She mirrored his stillness, his silence. She looked from his eyes to the proffered toy. It was a bridge. He was building a bridge across the silence, and he was asking her to cross it. She extended her own hand, palm up, moving with excruciating slowness. She did not reach for the horse. She simply offered her hand as a place for it to rest. He watched her, his expression unreadable, processing this new, terrifying form of interaction. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he took one more shaky step and gently, so gently, placed the wooden horse in the center of her palm. The wood was warm from his grip. As his small fingers brushed against hers, he did not flinch. He did not recoil. He let his hand linger for a fraction of a second, a moment of contact that defied every page of his medical file. And then he made a sound. It was not a word. It was a soft, questioning ah, a tiny exhalation of breath and voice, the first voluntary vocalization anyone had heard from him in years. Amelia's heart felt like it would burst. It was a sound of discovery, of connection. It was everything. She curled her fingers around the precious offering, her own hand trembling. She looked up at him, into those beautiful, intelligent eyes, and she gave him a small, watery smile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In that moment, in the quiet of the kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread, they understood each other perfectly. He had trusted her with his most prized possession, and she had accepted it with the reverence it deserved. The spell was broken by a sharp, angry voice from the doorway. "What is going on here?" Alistair Blackwood stood there, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen the entire interaction on his office monitor, and his fear had instantly morphed into fury. All he saw was his fragile, vulnerable son, far from his safe space, and the unqualified maid breaking every single one of his meticulously crafted rules. The fragile connection shattered. Leo flinched as if struck, the soft sound dying in his throat. He scrambled backward, his eyes wide with panic, and fled down the hallway, the sound of his bare feet a frantic, slapping retreat. The wooden horse remained in Amelia's hand. She was still on her knees, the warmth of the small toy a stark contrast to the icy dread that now flooded her veins. She looked up at Alistair, whose towering frame filled the archway, his eyes blazing with a potent mix of fear and fury. The first bridge had been built, only to be burned by the man who wanted it most. "I gave you specific instructions." Alistair's voice was low, seething with a controlled rage that was more terrifying than any shout. "No contact, no interaction. You were to leave him alone. What do you think you were doing?" He strode into the kitchen, his expensive leather shoes clicking menacingly on the marble floor. He stopped before her, a formidable, intimidating presence. Amelia remained on her knees, not out of fear, but because the shock and the sudden violent rupture of the moment had left her momentarily paralyzed. She clutched the wooden horse, its familiar worn shape, a small anchor in the storm of his anger. "Mr. Blackwood, please," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he cut her off, his voice sharp as broken glass. "I saw it on the monitor. You lured him out of his room. You engaged with him. You have undermined years of work by the finest specialist in the country. Do you have any idea how fragile his stability is?" His anger was a shield, protecting the raw, terrified hope that had been kindled within him only to be, in his mind, immediately threatened. He saw her actions not as a breakthrough, but as a reckless endangerment of the fragile equilibrium they had fought so hard to maintain. Amelia slowly rose to her feet, her movements deliberate and calm despite the trembling in her hands. She met his furious gaze without flinching. "His stability is not fragile," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's suppressed. What you call stability, Mr. Blackwood, is sedation." The word hung in the air between them, shocking and accusatory. Alistair's face hardened. "You are fired," he spat. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house in an hour." "No," Amelia said simply. The defiance in that single word stunned him into silence. No one said no to Alistair Blackwood. "Listen to me," she continued, her voice urgent but steady. "For months I have watched him. I have followed your rules, but I have also used my eyes. Leo is not the boy in those files. He is present. He is intelligent. He is trapped. The medication he is given 3 times a day doesn't calm him. It numbs him. It pushes him further away." She took a step toward him, holding out the wooden horse. "He has never let this out of his sight. Ever. Today he walked all the way from his room, and he gave it to me. He made a sound. He looked at me. Does that sound like the boy your specialists describe?" Alistair stared at the horse in her hand, his mind warring with itself. He had seen it. He couldn't deny what he had witnessed. The trust in his son's eyes, the voluntary offering, it was a miracle. But his fear, conditioned by years of dire warnings from Dr. Finch, was a powerful, suffocating force. "It was a fluke," he said, his voice lacking conviction. "You overstimulated him. You broke his routine." At that moment a small sound came from the hallway. They both turned. Leo was peeking around to the edge of the archway, his face streaked with silent tears. His eyes were fixed on his father, and for the first time there was a clear, discernible emotion in them: fear. He was afraid of his father's anger. Seeing that he had their attention, Leo looked from his father to Amelia. His gaze was pleading. Then he did something that shattered Alistair Blackwood's world. He took a single wobbly, hesitant step, not back toward the safety of his room, but forward into the kitchen, toward Amelia. His small hand was outstretched, reaching for her. The sight broke Alistair. It was as if the marble floor had fallen away beneath his feet. The anger, the fear, the carefully constructed walls of denial, they all crumbled into dust. This was not a fluke. This was not overstimulation. This was a choice. His son, his unreachable, untouchable son, was actively seeking comfort from this woman. All the specialists, all the money, all the strict protocols had achieved nothing. This quiet, unassuming maid, with her gentle humming and her smooth gray stones, had done the impossible. In 2 months, she had reached him. A raw, guttural sob escaped Alistair's throat. He stumbled back, leaning against the cold steel of the refrigerator for support, the strength gone from his legs. He covered his face with his hands, shame and a terrifying, brilliant hope warring within him. He had been so blind, so wrapped up in his own grief and the authoritative pronouncements of others, that he had failed to see the boy who was right in front of him. Amelia didn't look at Alistair. Her full attention was on the child. She knelt again, her expression soft and welcoming. "It's okay," she whispered, the first words she had ever spoken directly to him. "You're safe." Leo took another step, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He gently took the wooden horse from her outstretched hand, and then, with a trust that was absolute and heartbreaking, he leaned his forehead against her shoulder. He didn't hug her. He just rested there, a small, weary traveler who had finally found a safe harbor. Amelia wrapped her arms around him carefully, holding him as if he were the most precious, fragile thing in the world. Alistair watched through his fingers, silent tears streaming down his face. He wasn't just watching a maid comfort his son. He was watching the first sunrise after 2 years of unending night. His alliance had been with the wrong person all along. He lowered his hands, his expression transformed. The rage was gone, replaced by a fierce, desperate resolve. He looked at Amelia, who was now gently stroking Leo's hair, and their eyes met over the boy's head. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me what we do now." A tentative, fragile alliance was forged in that moment, built on a child's first steps toward hope. That night, after Leo was asleep, a deeper, more peaceful sleep than Alistair had seen in years, The mansion took on a different atmosphere. The oppressive silence was replaced by a charged, conspiratorial quiet. Alistair led Amelia to his office, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with books that had gone unread for years. It was the nerve center of his empire, but tonight it would become a war room. He unlocked a large filing cabinet and pulled out a stack of thick, heavy binders. "These are Leo's medical records," he said, his voice heavy. "Everything since he was born. Dr. Finch has been his primary physician since the day we brought him home. He was my wife's friend before he was my doctor. I trusted him completely." The last words were laced with a bitterness that was new and raw. He placed the binders on the vast mahogany desk, a testament to years of accepted authority. "I never questioned him," Alistair confessed, the words tasting like ash. "After Eleanor died, I was adrift. Finch took control. He managed everything concerning Leo, the specialists, the medications, the diagnoses. He said Leo's condition was a rare aggressive form of regressive autism triggered by the trauma of losing his mother. It made a horrible kind of sense." Amelia opened the first binder, her hands gentle on the cold plastic. The pages were filled with clinical jargon, charts, and reports, a cold, impersonal history of a little boy's life. "My sister had a son," Amelia said softly, her voice barely audible. The sudden personal disclosure made Alistair look up, startled. His name was Daniel. He was diagnosed with severe epilepsy when he was 3. The doctors put him on a powerful medication. It stopped the seizures, but it took him away. He was sleepy all the time, disconnected. My sister kept telling them it was too much, that she was losing her child. They told her she was being an emotional mother, that she didn't understand the science." Amelia's eyes were distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. She fought them. She found a new doctor, weaned Daniel off the heavy drugs and onto a different treatment. And he came back. It took time, but the light came back on in his eyes. He's a teenager now. He still has challenges, but he's himself. She finally looked at Alistair, her gaze filled with a profound, shared understanding. Experts are not always right, especially when they stop listening to the people who know the child best. For hours they worked their way through the files, a strange partnership of a billionaire tycoon and a quiet housekeeper, united by their devotion to a silent little boy. Alistair, with his sharp, analytical mind, sorted through the financial records and insurance claims, while Amelia, with her hard-won maternal intuition, focused on the nurse's notes and pharmaceutical logs. It was Amelia who found the first major inconsistency. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a page from a year and a half ago. "This is the initial prescription for the neurological regulator. The dosages listed here." She then flipped to a more recent log. "And this is the dosage he's on now. It's been tripled, but look at the nurse's notes. His weight has only increased by 10 pounds. His symptoms, according to these reports, haven't changed." Why would they triple the dose of a powerful drug on a small child with no corresponding change in condition? Alistair leaned over, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finch said he was building up a tolerance, that they needed to increase it to maintain the therapeutic level. Or, Amelia countered gently, the therapeutic level is complete sedation. The real breakthrough came near midnight. Alistair, frustrated, had started going through old boxes stored in his office closet, things he hadn't been able to look at since Eleanor's death. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. "Eleanor's," he said, his voice thick. He opened it, and the first thing that fell out was a photograph. It was of a laughing, vibrant Eleanor holding a baby, Leo, at about 9 months old. He was looking directly at the camera, his eyes bright and engaged, a wide, gummy smile on his face. He was a happy, responsive baby. Alistair stared at the photo, a fresh wave of grief and confusion washing over him. "I don't remember him like this," he whispered, a terrible admission. "By the time I came up for air after the funeral, he was—" Gone." He handed the journal to Amelia. Her fingers trembled as she took it. Eleanor's handwriting was a beautiful, flowing script. The early entries were filled with the joy of a new mother, chronicling Leo's first smiles, his babbling, his fascination with the family's golden retriever. Then the tone changed. Amelia read a passage aloud. October 14th. "Leo had a bad reaction to the strawberries I gave him. A small rash and some wheezing. I was so scared. We rushed him to the hospital. Dr. Finch met us there. He was wonderful, so calming. He said it was more than a simple allergy, that it might have triggered some kind of neurological event. He wants to run some tests, start Leo on a mild sedative to keep his system from getting overstimulated while he recovers. I'm so grateful to have James Finch in our lives. I don't know what I'd do without him." Alistair went rigid. "The strawberries," he breathed. "I remember that." Eleanor was frantic. Finch handled everything. "He told me Leo had a seizure, that the allergic reaction had caused a synaptic cascade. He used all this medical terminology I didn't understand. He said we were lucky we got him there in time." They scanned the next few entries. Eleanor wrote of Leo being sleepy and less engaged after starting the new medication. She worried, but she trusted her friend. Then the entries stopped. The next page was blank. 2 weeks after the strawberry incident, Eleanor was killed in a car accident. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. It wasn't the trauma of his mother's death that had triggered Leo's condition. It had started before that, with a minor allergic reaction, an incident that Dr. Finch had exaggerated, twisted, and used as an opportunity. "He lied," Alistair said, the words falling from his lips like stones. "From the very beginning, the neurological event never happened." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "He used your wife's trust and your grief to take control of your son's medical care. The motive was still murky, but the crime itself was becoming terrifyingly clear. Dr. James Finch, their trusted friend, the man who had delivered a eulogy at Eleanor's funeral, had systematically drugged a healthy child into a state of artificial disability. He hadn't been treating a condition, he had created one." Alistair stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the dark, manicured lawns of his estate. The entire foundation of his world for the past 2 years, his son's diagnosis, his own guilt, the path of treatment, was a lie. He had been a pawn in a monstrous deception, and his son was the victim. A cold, lethal fury began to replace his grief. "I'm going to destroy him," he vowed, his reflection in the glass a stranger with haunted, vengeful eyes. The investigation was over. The war was about to begin. The truth, once seen, could not be unseen. It colored every interaction, every memory of the past 2 years. Dr. Finch's concerned phone calls, his sympathetic pats on the shoulder, his authoritative medical pronouncements, all of it was now revealed as a grotesque pantomime. Alistair felt a nauseating mixture of rage and profound guilt. He had willingly handed his son over to a monster, too blinded by his own pain to see the truth. The central reveal was not a single moment, but a cascade of understanding. The motive, Alistair quickly deduced, was a sickening blend of control and finance. Dr. Finch sat on the board of several pediatric research foundations to which Alistair, at Finch's recommendation, had donated tens of millions of dollars. Finch managed Leo's sizable trust fund, which had been set up by Eleanor. By keeping Leo in a state of perpetual severe disability, Finch guaranteed his own position as the indispensable guardian of both the Blackwood heir and a significant portion of the Blackwood fortune. He had turned a little boy into a lifelong meal ticket. "We have to be careful," Amelia cautioned, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of Alistair's fury. "He has 2 years of falsified medical records on his side. He has a reputation as one of the top pediatric neurologists in the country. If we accuse him without irrefutable proof, he will paint you as an unstable, grieving father and me as a manipulative, unqualified caregiver. He could use it to have Leo taken away from you." Her words were a splash of icy water, bringing a necessary clarity to his rage. She was right. A direct confrontation was not enough. They needed to dismantle his credibility piece by piece. Their first step was to get Leo off the medication. Alistair called Mrs. Gable, the nurse, and informed her that her services were no longer required, stating that he was transitioning Leo's care to an in-house team. Then, under the guise of a stomach bug, they began to wean Leo off the drugs. Amelia carefully measured out decreasing doses, replacing the missing liquid with a simple sugar syrup so the volume appeared the same. They had to pray that there were no severe withdrawal symptoms. The change in Leo over the next few days was nothing short of miraculous. It was like watching a flower open in slow motion. The constant, agitated rocking lessened, replaced by long periods of quiet observation. His eyes, once hazy and unfocused, became sharp and clear. He started to explore. He would venture out of his room, his wooden horse still in hand, and silently investigate the house he had been a prisoner in. He would sit in the sunroom, watching the leaves on the trees, his expression one of wonder. He began to eat with a genuine appetite, no longer just passively accepting the food placed before him. He still didn't speak, but his silence was different. It was no longer a vacant absence. It was a watchful, contemplative quiet. He and Amelia developed their own language of gestures and shared glances. She would hum her melody, and he would appear at her side. He would touch her hand to get her attention. He led her to the garden one afternoon and pointed at a vibrant red rose, a small questioning sound in his throat. It was a revelation. Alistair watched all of this with a heart that felt like it was breaking and healing all at once. He saw the son he had lost, the bright, curious boy from Eleanor's photos, slowly re-emerging from the chemical fog. The guilt was a physical weight, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective love that was more powerful than anything he had ever felt. He began to change, too. He canceled his meetings, ignored the frantic calls from his office. He started spending his days at home, not locked in his study, but simply being present. At first he would just watch from a distance, afraid of disrupting the fragile peace Amelia had cultivated. Leo remained wary of him, associating his presence with anger and stress. One afternoon, Amelia was reading a picture book aloud in the living room, her voice soft and soothing. Leo was sitting on the floor beside her, his attention fixed on the colorful pages. Alistair entered the room and sat quietly on a sofa across from them. He didn't speak or move. He just sat there for an hour, breathing the same air, being part of the same quiet scene. Finally, Leo looked up from the book and stared at him. It was a long, appraising look. Alistair held his gaze, his heart pounding. He tried to pour all of his love, all of his regret, all of his promises into that single look. Leo then turned back to the book, but a few minutes later he picked up a small toy car from the floor and, without looking up, rolled it gently across the Persian rug in Alistair's direction. It stopped near his shoe. It was an olive branch, a test. Alistair's hand trembled as he reached down and picked it up. He held it for a moment, then gently rolled it back. Leo caught it. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the boy's lips. It was the beginning of their own bridge. The idol was shattered a week later. Dr. Finch, having not heard from Alistair and likely having been informed of Mrs. Gable's dismissal, decided to pay a surprise visit. He arrived unannounced, his familiar silver car crunching on the gravel of the driveway. Alistair's blood ran cold. "Keep him in the garden," he said to Amelia, in a low, urgent voice. "Do not let Finch see him." Amelia nodded, her face pale, and quickly led Leo out a side door, while Alistair went to intercept the doctor. He found Finch in the grand foyer, looking around with an air of proprietary concern. "Alistair," he said, his voice oozing false sympathy, "I was worried. I haven't been able to reach you. How is our boy doing?" "He's fine, James," Alistair said, his voice tight. "We've had a bit of a stomach bug going through the house, so we've been resting." "A stomach bug?" Finch's eyes narrowed slightly. "You should have called me. I could have prescribed something. And Mrs. Gable tells me you let her go." "That's unwise, Alistair. Leo needs consistency." Just then, a sound drifted in from the open doors of the sunroom, the sound of a child's laughter. It was a clear, joyful, unrestrained giggle. Leo had never laughed like that. Alistair's heart simultaneously soared and plummeted. Finch froze, his head cocked. "What was that?" he asked, his voice sharp. Before Alistair could answer, Leo himself appeared in the sunroom doorway, chasing after a butterfly, a huge, radiant smile on his face. He looked bright, alert, and utterly, completely normal. The moment he saw Dr. Finch, however, his smile vanished. A look of pure, instinctual fear crossed his face. He whimpered and ran to hide behind Alistair's legs, clutching his father's trousers with desperate strength. The mask dropped from Dr. Finch's face. The feigned concern was replaced by a look of cold, reptilian fury. He stared at the vibrant, responsive child who was supposed to be in a near catatonic state. He looked from Leo to Alistair's stony expression. He understood immediately that his deception had been discovered. The game was up. "What have you done?" Finch hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You foolish, foolish man, you have no idea what you've interfered with." The central reveal was complete. The monster was unmasked, standing right in their home, and in that moment Alistair knew that Dr. Finch would not go down without a fight. He would try to destroy them all. Dr. B. Finch's retaliation was swift and brutal. He was a man who had built his career on reputation and influence, and he wielded them both like weapons. The day after the confrontation at the mansion, the first attack came. A major news outlet published a sensationalized story, fed to them by an anonymous source close to the family. The headline was explosive. Troubled billionaire Alistair Blackwood, under influence of unqualified healer, endangers autistic son. The article painted a damning picture. It portrayed Alistair as an emotionally unstable recluse reeling from his wife's death, who had fallen prey to a manipulative charlatan. Amelia Hale was described as a mysterious woman with a questionable past who was practicing medicine without a license, employing dangerous, unproven methods on a severely disabled child. The piece quoted concerned medical professionals, all unnamed but clearly Finch's colleagues, who expressed grave fears for Leo's safety. Alistair's carefully guarded privacy was shattered. The gates of the mansion were suddenly besieged by paparazzi, their long-lensed cameras like the barrels of sniper rifles. The public smearing was only the beginning. The next blow came in the form of an official-looking envelope, delivered by a court courier. It was a petition filed by Dr. Finch with the family court. He was seeking emergency medical guardianship of Leo, alleging that Alistair was an unfit parent who was actively harming his child by withholding vital medication. The petition was filled with expertly crafted lies, backed by years of his own falsified medical reports. It claimed that Leo was at risk of seizures, irreversible neurological damage, and even death, if his treatment was not immediately reinstated. A hearing was set for the following week. "He's trying to take my son," Alistair said, the paper trembling in his hand. The words were hollow with disbelief and terror. He had all the money and power in the world, yet he was being outmaneuvered by a man he had once called a friend. The worst was yet to come. 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up the driveway, and 2 social workers from Child Protective Services, a man and a woman with grim, professional faces, were at the door. They had received an anonymous tip, undoubtedly from Finch, alleging child neglect and abuse. The interview was a nightmare. The social workers were polite but firm, their questions laced with suspicion. They inspected the house, took notes on Leo's room, and asked to speak with both Alistair and Amelia separately. They observed Leo, who, sensing the tension and the presence of strangers, had become withdrawn and anxious. He wasn't the joyful, laughing boy from the garden. He was a scared child clinging to Amelia's side. To the social workers, this likely looked less like a breakthrough and more like an unhealthy, codependent attachment. The preliminary order they issued was a devastating blow. Pending the court hearing, Amelia Hale was to have no further contact with the child. She was ordered to vacate the premises immediately. "It's a standard precaution," the woman explained, her tone clinical. "We have to eliminate any potential risk factors until the court can assess the situation." The separation was agonizing. Amelia tried to be brave for Leo's sake, but tears streamed down her face as she knelt to say goodbye. "I have to go away for a little while, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But you be brave for your papa. He loves you so much." Leo didn't understand the words, but he understood the finality in her tone. He let out a heart-wrenching wail, a sound of pure anguish, and clung to her, his small body racked with sobs. Alistair had to physically pry his son away, his own heart shattering into a million pieces. He watched from the doorway as Amelia got into a car he had arranged, her face a mask of grief. The moment she was gone, the light and warmth she had brought into the house seemed to vanish with her. Leo's regression was immediate and catastrophic. He refused to eat. He stopped leaving his room. The joyful curiosity was replaced by a listless despair. He would sit on the floor clutching his wooden horse and stare at the empty doorway for hours. He wouldn't even look at Alistair, his grief and sense of betrayal a palpable wall between them. The silence returned to the Blackwood mansion, but this time it was heavier, more desolate than ever before. It was the silence of a hope that had been born and then murdered. Alistair was pushed to the brink of despair. Finch's strategy was diabolically brilliant. By separating Leo from Amelia, he had engineered the very regression that would prove his case. He could now walk into court and argue that without his medication and Amelia's disruptive influence, the boy was deteriorating exactly as he had predicted. For a single dark night, Alistair considered giving in. He thought about calling Finch, begging for a truce, agreeing to anything just to end the torment and make his son's crying stop. He sat in the dark of his office, the guardianship petition on his desk, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He was a king in the world of business, but in this he was utterly helpless. Then he looked up and saw the photograph of Eleanor and the smiling baby Leo on his desk. He thought of Amelia's quiet strength, her unwavering belief in his son. He thought of Leo's laughter in the garden. That was real. That was the truth. Finch had taken everything from them, but he would not take that. The despair hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Finch had started a war, and Alistair Blackwood was finally ready to fight back with the only weapons he had, his fortune, his influence, and the righteous fury of a father. He picked up the phone and called the most ruthless team of lawyers in the city. "I want to hire you," he said, his voice deadly calm, "and I want you to spare no expense. We are going to bury a man named James Finch." Alistair Blackwood, once a titan of industry motivated by profit and legacy, was now singularly focused on a new kind of acquisition, justice. He mobilized his resources with a speed and ferocity that had built his empire. The legal team he hired was legendary, a pack of sharks who smelled blood in the water. He also hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy, tasking them with a simple, all-encompassing directive. Find everything. I want to know every secret Dr. Finch has ever had. While the lawyers prepared for the custody battle, burying Finch's legal team in an avalanche of motions and discovery requests, the investigators began to dig into the doctor's life. They were discreet, thorough, and relentless. They combed through his financials, his professional history, his personal life. What they began to uncover was a pattern of greed and ethical corruption hidden beneath a veneer of professional respectability. Finch had massive gambling debts, which he was paying off with funds siphoned from the charitable foundations Alistair had so generously endowed. He had been a defendant in 2 sealed malpractice suits early in his career. He was living a life far beyond the means of a simple pediatrician, even a successful one. Alistair, meanwhile, focused on the most critical piece of evidence, Leo himself. He knew that Finch would present Leo's regression as proof of his own necessity. Alistair needed to prove it was the result of a traumatic separation. He reached out to a renowned child psychiatrist from another state, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, who was a fierce critic of overmedication in children. He flew her in on his private jet, along with a team and a mobile diagnostic unit, to conduct a full, independent evaluation of Leo. For 2 days, Dr. Thorne and her team observed Leo in his home environment. They drew blood, ran an EEG, and performed a battery of non-invasive tests. Alistair showed her videos he had taken on his phone during the weeks Amelia was there, videos of Leo laughing, exploring and rolling the car back and forth with his father. He then contrasted them with Leo's current desolate state. Dr. Thorne's findings were unequivocal and damning. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her expression grim as she sat across from him in his office, "your son does not present with the clinical markers for profound autism. He presents as a neurologically typical child suffering from the effects of long-term benzodiazepine exposure and acute situational trauma. The levels of sedatives in his bloodstream are, frankly, unconscionable. They are dosages we might use for preoperative sedation in an adult, not for daily maintenance in a 5-year-old. This is not treatment. This is a criminal act." The investigators delivered their own bombshell. They had located a nurse, a woman named Clara, who had worked at the hospital with Finch years ago during the time of the strawberry incident. She had quit shortly after, troubled by his practices. At first, she was terrified to speak, afraid of Finch's power to ruin her career. But Alistair's investigators made her an offer she couldn't refuse: full legal protection, a generous relocation package, and the chance to finally clear her conscience. In a videotaped deposition, Clara's story corroborated their worst fears. "I was on duty in the ER the night Mrs. Blackwood brought Leo in," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a mild allergic reaction, a rash, some minor respiratory distress. We gave him an antihistamine, and he was breathing normally within 20 minutes. There was no seizure, no synaptic cascade." Dr. Finch insisted on admitting him for observation, and he told Mrs. Blackwood it was much more serious than it looked. He falsified the admitting chart. "I knew it was wrong, but he was a senior physician. I was scared. I quit a week later." They had it all: the financial motive, the independent medical proof of poisoning, and a credible eyewitness to the original lie. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was a tense, sterile environment. Dr. Finch was there, looking confident and somber in a tailored suit, surrounded by his lawyers. He presented himself as the concerned, long-suffering physician, forced to take this drastic step to save a child from his unstable father. Alistair sat at the opposing table, his expression like granite. When it was Finch's turn to present his case, he spoke eloquently of Leo's profound disability and Alistair's tragic denial. He presented his meticulously falsified records as evidence. He described Amelia as a dangerous influence, and claimed that Leo's current regression was proof that withdrawing the medication was causing a catastrophic decline. Then it was Alistair's turn. His lead counsel, A sharp, formidable woman named Miss Davenport stood up. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not here to debate Mr. Blackwood's fitness as a parent. We are here to present evidence of a monstrous, long-term crime committed against a defenseless child." What followed was a systematic dismantling of Dr. Finch's entire world. Ms. Davenport first introduced the sworn testimony and comprehensive report from Dr. Eris Thorne, outlining the toxicology results and Leo's true diagnosis. A gasp went through the courtroom. She then played the videotaped deposition of Nurse Clara, whose testimony directly contradicted Finch's account of the inciting incident. Finch's face went white. Finally, Ms. Davenport presented the investigators' findings: the gambling debts, the embezzled charity funds, the clear financial motive for keeping Leo under his control. The case for medical guardianship had transformed into a criminal indictment. Dr. Finch began to crumble on the stand under Ms. Davenport's merciless cross-examination. His professional composure dissolved, replaced by panicked, sputtering denials. The judge, a woman with decades of experience in family court, watched him with an expression of undisguised contempt. "Dr. Finch," the judge said, her voice cold as steel, "I have heard enough. I am not only denying your petition for guardianship, I am ordering a full investigation by the State Medical Board and the District Attorney's Office based on the evidence presented here today. You are not to go anywhere near Leo Blackwood or his father. Bailiffs, please escort this man from my courtroom." Finch looked utterly destroyed, a hollowed-out shell of the powerful man who had walked in that morning. As the bailiffs led him away, he shot Alistair a look of pure, venomous hatred. Alistair met his gaze, not with triumph, but with the cold, quiet finality of a chapter being closed. He had won. He had protected his son. Now all that was left was to bring the heart of their home back. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text to the driver, who was waiting with Amelia at a nearby hotel. "It's over. Come home." The drive back to the mansion was a blur for Amelia. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a chaotic rhythm of hope and anxiety. Alistair's text had been sparse on details, but the two words, "come home," were everything. When the car finally turned onto the long, familiar driveway, she saw Alistair standing on the front steps, waiting for her. He looked different. The haunted, grief-stricken man she had first met was gone. In his place stood a father who had been to war for his son and won. He looked tired, but his shoulders were straight, his eyes clear and resolute. She got out of the car, and for a moment they just stood there, the space between them charged with everything they had been through. No words were necessary. He gave her a small, grateful nod, and it was enough. "He's in the living room," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. "He hasn't moved from the window since you left." Amelia's breath hitched. She walked past Alistair and through the massive front doors, her steps hurrying on the marble floor. The house felt different, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time it felt warm. She entered the living room. Leo was sitting on the floor, his back to the door, staring out the large bay window that overlooked the gardens. He was small and still, a portrait of sorrow. He was clutching his wooden horse so tightly his knuckles were white. "Leo," she said softly. Her voice was just a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a beacon. The small figure froze. Slowly, hesitantly, as if he couldn't trust his own ears, he began to turn. His eyes widened when he saw her. For a second he just stared, his face a canvas of disbelief, confusion, and dawning miraculous hope. A choked sob escaped his lips. "Mia," he said. The sound was rough, unpracticed, but it was a name. Her name. It was his first word. Amelia's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, her own sob catching in her throat. "Oh, Leo," she breathed. He scrambled to his feet. He looked down at his own legs as if commanding them to work. He took one wobbly step, then another. He wasn't the hesitant, fearful child from the kitchen. This was different. This was a purposeful, determined journey. He stumbled, caught his balance, and then he was half walking, half running across the room. He didn't stop until he had thrown himself into her arms, his small body colliding with hers with a force that knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her neck, his little arms wrapped around her as tightly as he could manage, his tears soaking her shirt. Amelia held him, rocking him back and forth, her own tears flowing freely. She breathed in the familiar scent of his hair, felt the precious weight of him in her arms. He was home. She was home. Alistair stood in the doorway watching them, his own face wet with tears. He was witnessing not just a reunion, but a resurrection. His son, who had been lost to him for so long, was being reborn in this moment, in the arms of this extraordinary woman. The sound of his son's first word, the sight of his first real, confident steps, they were the sounds and sights of victory, of a future he had never thought possible. Later that day, the three of them sat in the garden. Leo, nestled securely between Amelia and Alistair on a bench, was chattering. It wasn't a conversation in the traditional sense, but a stream of sounds, rediscovered syllables, and pointed fingers at birds, flowers, and clouds. He was a spring that had been dammed up for years and was now, finally, flowing free. Amelia had her arm around him, and Alistair's hand rested gently on his other side. At one point, Leo reached out and took his father's hand, lacing his small fingers through Alistair's. Alistair's breath caught, and he squeezed back gently, a silent promise passing between them. The vindication in the courtroom was a public victory, but this quiet moment in the sun, was the true triumph. The antagonist was defeated, the lies were silenced, and the truth, in the form of a little boy's rediscovered voice, was finally free to speak. The broken pieces of their lives were beginning to knit themselves back together, not into what they had been before, but into something new. Something stronger, something that felt, for the very first time, like family. 2 years later, the Blackwood mansion was unrecognizable. The silence was gone, replaced by the constant joyful noise of a 7-year-old boy. Laughter echoed in the hallways where once only grief had whispered. The sterile, museum-like rooms were now filled with life. Scattered Lego bricks, finger paintings taped to the refrigerator, and the lingering, comforting scent of Amelia's baking. The house had become a home. Leo was thriving. With the help of a dedicated team of therapists, hand-picked by Dr. Thorne and Amelia, he had made astonishing progress. He was talkative, curious, and deeply empathetic. The years of sedation had left some developmental gaps they were still working to close, but his spirit, the bright, intelligent light that Dr. Finch had tried so hard to extinguish, was radiant. He was enrolled in a small private school, and, while he was a little shy, he was making friends. His favorite thing in the world was still his worn wooden horse, but now it sat on his bedside table, a relic of a past he barely remembered, no longer a shield against the world. Alistair Blackwood was a changed man. The ruthless CEO who worked 18-hour days was a distant memory. He had restructured his company, delegating most of the day-to-day operations to a trusted board. His focus now was his family. He never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. He had learned to be not just a provider, but a present, engaged father. The cold, brittle shell he had built around his heart had been melted away by the warmth of his son's laughter and Amelia's quiet, steady love. Amelia was no longer the maid. She was the heart of their home, the center of their small universe. She and Alistair had fallen into a partnership that was as natural as breathing. Their shared trauma and their mutual devotion to Leo had forged a bond of profound respect and affection that had slowly, quietly blossomed into love. There was no grand proposal, just a simple, unspoken understanding that they belonged together. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by a shared journey through darkness into light. The final scene of their old life played out in a courtroom. Dr. James Finch, after a lengthy trial, was found guilty of multiple counts of aggravated assault, medical malpractice, and embezzlement. He was sentenced to a long prison term, his name and reputation irrevocably destroyed. For Alistair and Amelia, the verdict was not a cause for celebration, but a quiet, somber confirmation of what they already knew. It was the closing of a painful chapter. Their epilogue was being written every day, in the small, ordinary moments of their new life. It was written in the way Alistair would come home from the office early to help Leo with his homework. It was written in the way Amelia would hum her simple melody in the kitchen, and Leo and Alistair would both find themselves drawn to the sound. It was written in the easy, loving glances they shared over their son's head at the dinner table. One crisp autumn afternoon, they attended Leo's school sports day. Alistair, in a casual sweater instead of a business suit, stood next to Amelia on the sidelines. They watched as Leo participated in a sack race. He was clumsy and uncoordinated, laughing uproariously every time he stumbled and fell. He didn't win or even come close, but his face was alight with pure, unadulterated joy. As he hopped across the finish line dead last, he looked over at them and gave them a huge, triumphant grin. In that moment, Alistair felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. All the money, all the power, all the success of his former life felt like pale, meaningless shadows compared to the brilliant, shining reality of his son's smile. He slipped his arm around Amelia's waist, pulling her close. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes like his, fixed on their son. They had faced a monster, and won. They had reclaimed a life from the brink of oblivion. Their story was a testament not to wealth or power, but to the simple, enduring truth that the most powerful force in the world is a love that refuses to give up. The true measure of a person's worth is not found in the empires they build, but in the quiet, unwavering courage they show when protecting the ones they love. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that.